Today, we're hoping the safety bars are secure as we take an unfiltered ride on the TARIFF roller coaster. Can someone please pump the brakes on Trump's economic madness? Also, we set sail on the U.S.S. Fragile Masculinity with Pete Hegseth, of course. And why does the name Harvey Milk and others make him so angry anyway? Then we'll talk about Putin's nuclear threats in the wake of Ukraine's very successful drone attack into Russia. Is Putin serious about this? Plus, Den, do you want a job in the federal government? Then you need to be ready to write an essay about how awesome Trump is.
So
the health and very lives of pregnant women continue to be diminished. We'll talk about that. But don't worry, because Joni Ernst would like to remind everyone that we're all going to die anyway. This is Truth in the Barrel, a different kind of whiskey rebellion. Welcome to Truth in the Barrel. I'm Amy McGrath with my co-host just back from Ukraine, Denver Riggleman. Welcome home, Denver.
Thank you. 1 o'clock this morning. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm going to tell you right now. So this is needed.
Well, you haven't had a lot of sleep, so I'm really happy you're here today talking about the news of the day.
Well, you've caught me up. I mean, I looked at everything our great team, our crack team did, and I was trying to keep up to date on things, Amy, but it was a little difficult over there, mostly because I didn't have any coverage. I mean, let's be honest.
We'll get you up to speed.
Yes, thank you.
Before we do,
I'm ready.
I want to say, and I want to share with everybody that we have less than a week left before the launch of our live show, Tuesday night, June 10th, 7:30 to 8:30 Eastern Time. We're going to be answering all of your questions, talking about the news of the day, having a lot of fun, drinking whiskey. So please join us for our first live show. And you have to head over to our YouTube channel to view that live show. You hit subscribe, turn on the notifications. That way you won't miss out on anything. And that way you can be involved in the chat on that live show, right?
It's going to be so exciting. I can't wait. But people need to make sure they subscribe to get on that live show, right, Amy? Like they gotta subscribe to the YouTube. They got to get the podcast, and they need to follow us so they know what's happening.
Yeah, and they can always send us an email, tell us what they want to talk about. We can go from there. Normally, Denver, we jump right into Whiskey Minute at this point, but we've decided to change things up a bit. We're going to stay tuned later in the episode here because we'll tell you about Basil Hayden, which is the drink that I'm preferring today. And we're going to do that right before our quick shot segments. All right?
I'm ready. I love me some basil.
Before we are going to have fun there, we need to get into some business. And I'm talking the business of tariffs, right? We've been talking about this all spring. We're now into the summer. And this week on Wednesday, June 4th, Trump instituted these 50% tariffs on metals. They went into effect this week for the second time since March. Donald Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum have increased. Now they've doubled from 25 to 50%. So I want to talk about this because there's a lot of pain associated with these tariffs and what do they really mean?
Yeah, and what I would notice, as I was preparing for this is, what's amazing is we have these tariffs coming on metals, but we also have precious metal issues. I mean, there's so many things that we need to talk about here, but it's almost as if it's the person who wants to rebuild a bridge, Amy, and instead of utilizing the old bridge while they're building the new bridge, every time that Donald Trump gets one of his bright idea fairies to get on his shoulder, he blows up that bridge and then demands another bridge to be rebuilt in real time. And what you're seeing across the globe is this devaluation in the dollar also. So when you're looking at these tariffs and his inability to have a stable decision-making process, the globe reacts to it. And they're reacting to it because China right now is negotiating currency contracts with other countries without the United States involved. And people are afraid to actually put their money in American dollars because they're not sure about the stability of our government policy process. And I think that's what scares me again. And we've talked about this for the last, Amy, 4 months, is that it seems like these decisions are not based on any economic fact or scientific fact. They seem to be very spontaneous.
I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's dumb. Okay, so I want
It's
to talk
dumb.
specifically just about this these steel and aluminum tariffs. Now, we import some steel and some aluminum. We import as a percentage more aluminum than steel. And the goal of these tariffs, the way the Trump administration initially talked about it, was that they wanted to bring back steel and aluminum manufacturing to the United States. Now, they instituted tariffs during the first administration on these metals. And did manufacturing come back to the United States during that time? No.
No.
So what happened during that time? And what happens when you institute these tariffs? Basically, what happens is the steel and aluminum companies, they raise their prices. They have the ability to do that now because there's the competition, gets diminished. They raise their prices. They get more profit out of that. And you might say, well, that's good. That's good for American companies, right? Well, who pays the price? The rest of us do. Yeah, send it.
Yeah, it's so during COVID, when you have supply chain issues, right? When you're looking at metal, aluminum, glass, all that, that was hit because COVID was we call it act of God, but it was a pandemic, right? Where people had to react to that. And at the last time the dollar was really devalued, but it's also when you had these supply chain issues and these pass-through costs, they were very dire. And, and eventually you saw this inflation spike as money was pumped into the economy to try to mitigate what happened during COVID. What's interesting about this, when you're talking about tariffs like this, is this pass-through to the consumers is happening because of self-inflicted wounds. You use this word, and I think it's scientifically correct, Amy, dumb. I think, it's just dumb. There's really not a reason for it except for the fact that he said he was going to do this. And he's really getting advice from some of the worst people, that, from the Russell Vaught's to Peter Navarro. And think about the people that I'm talking about here, the Project 2025 guy and Peter Navarro, who said January 6th was stolen and just a virulent conspiracy theorist. So these are the people giving him advice, Amy. So it's pretty interesting that we're looking at sort of this devaluation of the dollar, these supply chain issues, these pass-through costs to consumers because of self-inflicted wounds instead of something like COVID. And I think that's what I got a call this morning, actually, from somebody in banking talking about this very issue. And that's why I think it's something we need to cover, is that all of this is self-inflicted. There's no real reason for it because he could have negotiated this before. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
They're not bringing manufacturing back. That didn't happen last time. As you said, that the costs just go into consumers. And what does that mean? It's the cost of cars goes up, sports equipment goes up, soda, beer cans, all that stuff goes up. Okay, so it trickles down. And here's the thing. I've heard from the other side, the people trying to justify this stuff, the mega tariff, whatever, people out there really trying to justify anything that Trump does that's unjustifiable. They're saying that the CBO report, when the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, when they like it, they cite it. When they don't like it, they don't cite it, or they say that it's false. But in this case, they're saying, hey, there's a CBO report out there that's saying that the tariffs could reduce the deficit by $2.8 trillion by 2035. The problem with that, of course, is the caveat is that these tariffs, for those savings to happen, the tariffs would have to be permanent. And they would specifically could not change from their current rates over the next several decades. And that requires that Trump is consistent, even in the 4 years that he's in office, which we know that's not going to happen. So it doesn't make any sense. It causes a ton of pain. And the last thing I'll say about this, and this I think is really critical. There's a Wall Street Journal report that came out just a few days ago that said that car manufacturers are actually considering making some of their parts not in the United States, as was the reason for these tariffs, or one of the reasons that they institute them in the beginning, in the first place, but the car manufacturers are now thinking about making some of their parts in China.
Better
and
access.
It has to do with rare earth metals. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So rare earth metals. So when you're looking at processing plants for rare earth metals in China, there's over 3 dozen. I believe the number's 38. When you're looking at rare earth mineral processing in the United States, Amy, would you dare to venture a guess at how many rare earth mineral processing centers there are in the United States?
We don't have hardly any.
Zero.
Yeah, zero.
Right. And so a lot of the rare earth minerals we have are sent to China for processing. Now, Amy, I hope people listening to this just sort of got what I just said there. Right. So as we're escalating this trade war, rare earth minerals are used for anything with about components, whether it's from computers, data transfer. You're talking about all kinds of incredible things that rare minerals are actually used for. America has some. We have rare earth minerals, but we always relied on China for a majority of the processing of those rare earth minerals. The reason car companies say they got to go to China is because with everything that's happening right now, there's instability in actually being able to build the components of the vehicles themselves. And when I was in Dubai, Amy, I got to drive in a BYD, a Build Your Dreams car, better than Tesla, much more stable. And I think what we're seeing right now is American car companies and global companies, and I want to emphasize that global companies, they're looking across this whole sort of geopolitical landscape right now. And they're like, America seems like it's being run by a madman who's making, again, as you said, I'm going to use your word, if I may, dumb decisions. And we have real CEOs saying, we don't know if we can live in this environment.
Yeah, so you need these rare earth metals for the newer technology cars that we use. They're magnets, right? And China because of the tariff wars, China put export controls on these things, okay? So imagine they're like dime size metals. And so now these car manufacturers, Ford, the Chevy,
Stellantis, Dodge.
the American car manufacturers use these metals. They typically get them processed from China, shipped here, but now they can't because China is putting controls on this because of Donald Trump. And so now what car manufacturers are having to think about doing is taking the engine, or parts of the engine, shipping it over, unfinished engines, shipping them over to China so that the Chinese can put the chips in the engines and then shipping the engines back to the United States. Now, how smart, Denver, is it to ship an unfinished engine part halfway across the world, to have a dime-sized chip put in it, only to ship it back, only for that piece to then be exposed to more tariffs on the way back? How smart is that?
I don't think it's don't think it's really smart at all. It might be dumb. And I think we're to a point though, when if you have somebody who's been found liable for sexual abuse, who's been convicted of 34 felonies and pays off porn stars and Playboy bunnies in order to keep that out of the media before an election, maybe that person shouldn't be making decisions on financial matters for the United States, and somebody who's gone bankrupt multiple times, and somebody who's a grifter, right? And now he's using the American system and people for his own wealth. But what you're seeing right now is there's something else in the background, right, Amy? These tariffs, they seem very spontaneous and dumb, as you said, but you wonder who's benefiting in the stock market, the dips, the shorts, who's aware of that. And I feel like this is, again, something financial for Donald Trump that's hurting the American people. But as long as he enriches himself and those around him, I think that makes him happy. And again, when you have somebody that's this morally loose, this ethically challenged, and somebody who's this misogynistic and awful as a human being, maybe that's why we're having issues with these dumb decisions in our economic policy.
Yeah, and you can't say that this stuff isn't affecting us already. Ford Motor Company already shut down its Ford Explorer plant in Chicago for a week. Why? Because they can't get these rare earth minerals. They can't get the parts. And so
I thought Ford was a success story, Amy. Didn't they come out with employee pricing right when the tariffs came out? It wasn't MAGA
car manufacturers
about that?
are saying right now that they might have to stop production if this doesn't stop. I mean, it's ridiculous. These tariffs are continue to hurt us, and it's just dumb. So
he did say he loved the best time in American history was 1870 to 1913. So, Amy, I've been looking for horses and to build a stable to go back to those heady times right during the Industrial Revolution. I can't wait.
What was the life expectancy back then, Denver?
I think it was like 53. Actually, I'd already be keeled over. I probably would.
And we probably love it because women don't have the right to vote. So that's kind of
the heady times of pre-suffrage.
Excellent. All right. While Trump is busy making cars more expensive, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is laser focused on protecting us from woke ships. Oh yeah. Since taking office, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has made his mission to restore the, quote, warrior ethos to the armed forces. Now, look, there's not a lot of people who look at the United States military and believe that it's ravaged by wokeism. But Pete Hegseth does. I mean, he's like obsessed with this. And I don't know, man. He's just completely insecure. And I'll turn it over to you, and then I'm gonna go on a rant. I'm sorry, I got to.
I'm ready for the rant, and I would say that somebody with presumably white nationalist tattoos making decisions might mean that there could be some racism, some homophobia, some misogyny in the decision making, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. And anybody who wants to change the name, from Harvey Milk, which is ludicrous. This is a guy who was assassinated. Right, Amy?
Yeah. So what you're talking about here is Pete Hegseth coming out and saying the Department of Defense and the Trump administration saying they're going to change these names on U.S. Navy ships.
Yes.
One in particular was named after a civil rights icon, Harvey Milk. And, Harvey Milk was a Korean War Navy vet. He was an operations officer on rescue subs. And then he fought for the rights of lesbian and gay Americans. And he was actually assassinated in the early 1970s. He's a civil rights icon. Yeah. And so Hegseth wants to take the ship that is named after him, change the name, and announces this during Pride Month. How fucked up is that?
Fucked up is the right word, and dumb. Maybe that's the theme, maybe. Up and dumb.
It's not just stopping with Harvey Milk either. Okay. So there's plans said to be underway to rename lots of different ships. And guess what, Denver? Guess who who he's renaming the ships that are named after? They're named after women. They're named after black Americans, Latina Americans, LGBTQ Americans. Harriet Tubman. They're talking about naming Harriet Tubman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
baddest ass woman on the planet,
Thurgood Marshall, Cesar Chavez, Medgar Evans. These are all ships that are being built, or have already been built, that are named after these civil rights icons. And it's just, to me, it's shameful. His actions are shameful and weak.
And I mean, aren't we to a point, Amy? I mean, it's exhausting, right? Because a lot of the, think about the bases, right? We're renaming bases back to Confederate generals. They try to come up with excuses why they're not doing it, like Bragg. Give me a break, right? It was Alvin Bragg. Because shut up. No, it's not. We know. So we're renaming bases back to Confederate generals, and most of those, and if I remember correctly, my history, Amy, I think most Confederate generals were white males. Am I correct in that? I think.
Pretty
mostly
sure.
No,
yeah.
Pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't think there was Major General, Sally Johnson, Confederate general. I don't think that happened. So I have a feeling, and tell me if I'm wrong, Amy, it's a guess. It's just a guess that all the names of these new ships will be white males. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. And you get this a little bit in the veteran spaces, conservative spaces, that, hey, all of these ships need to be named after warriors, not any of this other woke stuff. And here's what I think about this. U.S. Navy ships, first of all, it's a great honor to have a ship named after you. A U.S. Navy ship can be named after a location. It could be named after a battle. It could be named after a state. It could be named after a president. It could be, you can name them after anything. But a lot of Navy ships are named after famous veterans, famous warriors. But you know what? America, we're bigger than just our warriors. America is not Sparta. We can name our ships after the things
So right.
and ideals that America stands for, which, by the way, isn't just war. It's also freedom, equality, equal rights. And so that's why these ships were named after these really important Americans that stood up for, guess what? They stood up for America. Just like warriors stood up for America. That's why these ships are named after them.
So, Amy, are you saying maybe we should follow an American ethos and not just a warrior ethos? Is that what you're saying, Amy? That maybe America is built, not just on those who fought and died by the rifle or by armaments, but those who fought and died as they were walking the streets of Selma, or people who wanted, equal rights, those who were assassinated like Martin Luther King or Harvey Milk, right? Those women like Harriet Tubman who helped people to safety. That's the American spirit. And, that's why I sort of get goosebumps when we talk about these type of things, because that's what makes me love America, is that we have in some ways, a great past, but also a vile past. And we've tried to right those wrongs. And those names are about righting the wrongs of where the American dream went sideways, and where, from chattel slavery to all the things that we dealt with women couldn't vote, Amy. I mean, I don't think. And so this is what's incredible, right? Is we try to right these wrongs, and we have an administration right now who believes, right, that those times of slavery, of massive civil unrest, of racism, right, of women not being allowed to vote, of horses and living to the age of 53 should be the dream time of the American Republic. And I think it goes back to that a lot of these decisions are based in hatred and weakness, but they're also just dumb.
They're dumb. Well, first of all, I can't think of a more fierce American warrior than Harriet Tubman. I mean, seriously. But this is just dumb. And it's also, look, I don't think Donald Trump gives two shits about any of this. I think this is Pete Hegseth completely. The Secretary of the Navy really hasn't said anything. He's just kind of along for the ride at this point. And typically, as you know, Denver, these names are really unfolded and thought through by the Secretary of the Navy, not the Secretary of Defense, but the Secretary of the Navy in this case seems to be AWOL or out of the picture. This is purely Hegseth. And I'm going to say this because I think it's true. This is some serious small d energy here, right? And I'm not talking about small d democracy. He is like super insecure. I don't know how else to say it. It's terribly sad for the families and the legacy of the people, the great Americans who he is stripping the names from on these ships, and it's just wrong.
You're saying that he's intellectually hung like a pimple, I think is what you're saying, Amy. And I just want to, say that, just to try to clear up some things with that small d energy. When you talked about Harriet Tubman, when you talked about these individuals, it's hard for me not to actually get so incredibly angry. I think that's where you're at, and that's where I'm at, is that none of it makes sense. It's nonsensical. We say dumb, but it really is based in hatred. And based, as you said, on that small d energy of somebody who seems to be absolutely offended by anybody not white male. And it's hard to listen, as a normal thinking, sane human being, it's hard to get your arms around it. Me and you are trying to find the words, but it's difficult.
Yeah. And it's terrible to do this during Pride Month. I'm just really ashamed. Okay. Well, on that note, I want to move on to something also really important and very scary. It's no surprise that the mega world has long held up President Putin as the ultimate tough guy. But will that continue to be the case as Putin is now sort of escalating these nuclear threats against Ukraine in the wake of the Ukrainian successful drone attack into Russia? And I'm talking about the nuclear doctrine, the changes, and what we're sort of seeing in the battle of the words right now.
So right now, I'm going to say something pretty bold. Ukraine won the war. It's going to be slow. But I think with the strike into Russia, and I think with what happened in the Crimean Bridge, I think those absolutely crippled the ability for Russia to respond in a way that's military specific. And let me give you an example. So, what you see right now with him threatening nuclear strikes on Ukraine, um, I think that we have this thing where a Putin, the person that the MAGA far right thinks is actually the carrier of the torch for a Christian religion too, by the way, Amy, think about that, right? You have this individual who's threatened nuclear war because he knows he's losing the war. And interestingly, he wants the United States and the UK to help tame Ukraine. Well, I was over there. And after that strike, and even before that strike, there was indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets. It is a death cult, right? It is, and I think we're afraid to use this word, and I'm going to use it. It's evil. There is good against evil. And when you see evil in action, when you see it for real, you know it. You know what evil is. Putin is evil. America has always stood against him. My biggest thing about America and the U.S., if it was any other president or national command authority, if Russia would have threatened a nuclear strike on a country, Ukraine, democratically elected country, the U.S. would have the strongest response. And if I was president, I'd say, listen, we are NATO. If you hit Ukraine in a nuclear way, we are going to invoke Article 5 just because.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I would do. And I think that's what a real US president would do. And if Putin calls for US to tame Ukraine, F off. That is what again, just like we were talking about with our prior subject about dumb, now we're into almost this hateful ideology that we're mirroring with what Russia's doing. And I think with me being over there, maybe I'm a little bit radicalized right now on facts and what happened, but that's where I'm at.
Well, I want to bring it back just a little bit because the war of the words matters, and you talked about it a little bit with Vladimir Putin telling the UK and the United States to, quote, sort of tame Ukraine. In diplomatic speak, all of those words matter. And I want to bring it back to Russia's nuclear doctrine. So we know doctrines are sort of a way to communicate to the world what you would do. It doesn't necessarily mean there's no law in Russia that says they have to abide by their doctrine. It's just their way of communicating how and when they might use nuclear weapons. In the past, like prior to 2024, their nuclear doctrine was they would only use nuclear weapons if an attack on Russia threatens the very existence of that state. Now, they've changed it, Denver. They've lowered that threshold, and they've said in their new nuclear doctrine, which just came out a few months ago, that Russia has the option to use nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack. That's just a non-nuclear attack. Any conventional attack backed by a nuclear weapon power against any threat to Russia's sovereignty or territorial integrity and that of its ally Belarus. So I know that's a lot of jumbly gobbledygook there. But basically what that means is they're lowering the threshold for when they say they could launch a nuke. And I think that's something that is underreported. Now, whether it's real or not, we don't know. But does this spiderweb attack that just happened last week that Ukraine did against Russia, does it meet that threshold? Yes. It does. So here we are.
I would humbly submit that Ukraine needs to escalate more. After the Crimean Bridge, looking at drone warfare, I think at this point the EU, because the U.S., right, is supporting a pariah state, whether it's accidentally on purpose, it doesn't matter. I think the EU needs to pump as much money as they can right now to Ukraine and NATO. I think every single country surrounding it, the border countries, as we move up north to Finland, who wants to mobilize their 900,000 reserves because Russia is now starting to little saber rattling with Finland too, right? You get to the point where I think now is the time to escalate, not de-escalate. I always use these bar fight metaphors, but when the person's on the floor and he's like, now, he's got a knife and he's bleeding and bad, that's when you beat him with a chair. And I think right now we're at the chair beating stage for Russia. Because when you lose and when you get hit that hard, when you have done 3 years plus on a country you were supposed to roll in a week based on U.S. intelligence estimates. Now is the time for Ukraine to escalate. And I would humbly submit the U.S. should come in with billions of dollars a year, right, in order to arm them, whether it's HIMARS, any of our high-powered equipment, but also with drone components, right? And we should be side-saddling with them with the new type of drone warfare, with the stalemate on the front. Now, and I'll end with this because I know you probably have a lot to say on this. Ukraine wants a stalemate on the front. And with new drone warfare, you have that stalemate. Putin's not in a weird place, right? He really can't move. If his guys move out, thermal drones, backed with ISR drones, backed with HPVs, and larger payload drones are going to hit the front line. Ukraine's working AI-specific drone attacks. Russia has more drones, AI, Ukraine's more flexible and adaptable. So now he has to say, well, do I go with air power? Just today in Kherson, right, where I just was, right, they hit them with a glide bomb, right? So now they're doing more and more air power superiority. The thing is that Ukraine has F-16s and MiG-29s, right? Or that, and they have other aircraft now to mitigate some of that. So now he's like, well, I got to threaten nuclear war. And I think part of that escalation is it almost feels like a Kim Jong-un type of threat, almost like Russia's become like this sort of beefier North Korea. And I think that's where I think at this point we need to call his bluff. We need to escalate. The EU needs to escalate. Zelensky needs to say no negotiations until you move out of the Crimea and you move out of those territories, because we're coming now and you're on your heels. And when somebody makes a threat like that and they're laying on the floor and they still say they're going to kick your ass, that's when you beat them with the chair, because the floor doesn't start. The fight doesn't start until they're on the floor. And that's where I'm at right now with this whole situation.
That's a hawkish place to be. And it's bold. And I hear you. I think, we can't forget that Russia does have a ton of nuclear weapons. And we can't forget that if they are defeated conventionally, they could potentially use that. I don't know how credible that threat is. Right now, we're not seeing any changes in their nuclear posture. And in Denver, you and I know, and for people listening, you should know that we can kind of see whether they change their nuclear posture.
We have the sensors. Yes.
Right. So we can see that. Right now, there's no changes, but it is something that we need to watch. I think it is absolutely something we need to pay attention. I'm with you that I would love to double down and let's go get them, while they're down. But we definitely need to watch this.
Well, I mean, it was my dad. He goes, the fight doesn't start, until the person's on the floor. And I think right now, after, Trump yelling at Zelensky that he doesn't have the cards, I think that Zelensky showed that think about it. While Trump is screaming at Zelensky in the Oval Office, the planning for Spiderweb was happening, Amy.
You don't have the cards, Zelensky. He's like, oh, yeah, I do. They're in my pocket.
Man, what a cool customer. And not only that, you know what they were planning simultaneously? Destroying the Crimean Bridge.
I know. It's incredible.
It's incredible. And now Ukraine has the upper hand. And that's why you're seeing the civilian murders and the terror strikes inside of Ukraine today.
But let's also be real. I mean, the Russians have lost a lot of troops in this fight. That's, reports that they've lost more than the Brits did percentage wise in World War II. So, I mean, that's insane. I know. Insane. So it's just something to watch. The nuclear element to this is real, and we just have to watch it. That's all I'm saying at this point.
Well,
all right.
Incredible times.
Let's get into our whiskey minute, because this is the fun part. All right.
All right. I know you got some basil. I'm ready to hear. I'm ready to be educated.
Right, so can you see this here, Den? This is Basil Hayden Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, aged 10 years. And my husband bought this for me. He went down to my son's soccer tournament down in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And when the tournament was over, they did a little detour, Denver. Yeah, my husband with 12-year-old son. Yeah, to a distillery tour.
I have no comment.
And and he came back with some Basil Hayden. Anyway, Basil Hayden. Do you know who this was?
Educate me, ma'am. Educate me on Basil Hayden.
All right. So Basil Hayden was a pioneer in Kentucky bourbon. He came to Kentucky from Maryland. So he was a Marylander who moved to Kentucky in the late 1700s, I believed. And he was Catholic. He started a Catholic community in Bardstown, Kentucky, or was part of the Catholic community that settled there. And his big thing was rye. So he created this bourbon with a higher rye content. And it's now the defining characteristic of the Basil Hayden brand, which is from the Jim Beam company. And it's out of Bardstown, Kentucky. And it's very good. If you smell it, it's like vanilla-y. Okay. I don't know if that's the right word, vanilla-y, but it's got some like nutty flavor to it. It's very good.
Well, I want people to understand, because Amy knows this stuff very, very well. When Amy says it's a high rye bourbon, it's actually the center ingredient. So when you're looking at a high rye bourbon, it means it's over 51% corn, but the middle ingredient is rye, and then it's added malt. So if you look at wheated bourbons, a wheated bourbon is over 51% corn, but wheat is the second grain added, and then malted barley. So when Amy's talking about rye as part of the bourbon mash bill, it means that rye is the second largest ingredient inside the whiskey to give it that spice. So the malt helps with fermentation and flavor, but the rye or the wheat in the center of the bourbon can determine whether you have a spicier bourbon or a sweeter bourbon. And it seems to me, folks, that Amy McGrath loves it spicy. And
I do. I have to say, I like the ryes. Every time you go and you do like these bourbon tastings where they give you 4 or 5 different ones, it's always the rye one that's maybe not the top, but it's always like number 2 or number 1 that I pick out.
Well, I mean, part of it, I think, I'm a wheated bourbon guy, but I love some of the rye bourbons, right? I like a little bit more of the butterscotch and a little bit more on the finish. But rye, I tell you, get the right rye, it's almost, and you're going to laugh, but it's almost like a combination of vanilla and you're licking a leather strap with a little bit of pepper, right? And I think that is why I love rye-based bourbons, but also why I love rye whiskeys, because there's some days you just want a fighter whiskey. You want a whiskey you want to fight. Right. And you're going to pick up a rye bourbon or a rye whiskey. And that's why I think Amy McGrath likes spicy whiskeys. I'm just going to say that. Cheers.
Okay, that's good. Cheers. All right. Now.
That is, I'm drinking an Irish right now, Amy. I just want to let you know, I'm drinking Green Spot, which is a combination of unmalted and malted barley. That's an Irish, but it's aged in a bourbon barrel and finished in other barrels. But I wish I was having the Basil Hayden with you right now.
Can you do that again with that voice? That's really good.
Well, this whiskey really finished nicely. It's very nice.
Yeah. International man of mystery. Good. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to quick shots.
Hey, if you're looking to be hired by the federal government, I think you got to get ready to write the worst book report of your life. As you know, we said this a little bit earlier, all civil service applicants are now required to write an essay to be hired. So here's my thing. If I'm writing an essay on how to actually implement President Trump's executive orders or legislation, what the hell am I going to say? And it looks to me that anybody that's trying to be hired right now, Amy, it looks like they're going to actually have to have a loyalty test. And I'm to the point, I don't even know what to say anymore if you have civil servants that have to show loyalty to the President of the United States to get hired.
Yeah, it's just so wrong. And one of I guess they have to write 3 essays, and one of them has to do with how are you going to support and get behind Trump's executive orders and stuff like that. I mean, it's just wrong. Anyway.
Well, you know what I would do? I would use AI. I would use Grok to write the essays. That's what writing this for real. But that would be if you sell your soul, just use Grok AI or ChatGPT to write the essays, folks. Just a little bit of advice from Denver.
Yeah, that's good advice. Hey, Den, if it's a day that ends in a Y, then the Trump administration is once again attacking women and their access to healthcare. Earlier this week, the Trump administration rescinded guidance implemented during the Biden term that required hospitals to stabilize patients needing emergency care, even if that meant performing an abortion. So, yeah. Do you remember? Here's the thing about this. Do you remember when I was on the campaign trail and we we talk about abortion because it would come up. It was a big issue. When I talk to conservatives, mostly men, they would always say, I'm really against abortion, but not in the case of the life of the mother. What the Trump administration is doing right now is basically saying the life of the mother does not matter. That's where we're at.
Well, I have a wife, 3 daughters, and 3 granddaughters. Amy, you have a family of love, light, and lollipops. And here's the thing. This, to me, declares war on women in healthcare in a way that people like me, a white male of 55 years of age, wants to fight. And I wonder at what point husbands are going to step up for the women in their lives, their mothers, their wives, their daughters, granddaughters, nieces, friends. At what point do you say enough is enough? We're not going to kill women because we have idiots in charge who seems to ascribe to this Christian nationalist way of looking at things. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, so if you are if you're a woman in a state like Idaho or Texas where abortion is essentially illegal, and your life is at stake, you're like bleeding out, you're gonna die. Guess what? The doctors cannot necessarily be able to give you care because they can't perform an abortion. It used to be that you could do that for the life of the mother in an emergency situation, and that was kind of the rule. Now, no longer.
It's worse than a banana republic. We just become murderers at that point. And I mean, it's just awful. And anyhow, just not the greatest thing, right? But speaking of people maybe dying, Jim Morrison needs to step aside now, right? No one here gets out alive, crap, right? Because there's a new angst poet in town, and it's Joni Ernst, who said that we're all going to die anyway. We're talking about Medicaid cuts. What do you think about that, Amy? You think we're all going to die anyway, so why have any type of real health care for people in need anyway?
Yeah, well, no, she was at a town hall, right? And she was talking about the Medicaid cuts. And first of all, she was lying to people, basically saying, oh, no, the bill doesn't do anything, doesn't kick people off of Medicaid. It just takes the people that aren't supposed to be on it initially, and it gets rid of them. It gets rid of the Medicaid fraud, which is like not what the bill does at all. Okay. Mm-hmm. But then when a woman called her on that and said, hey, you're going to kill people. This is going to kill people. And she responded, well, we're all going to die. And then instead of like saying, yeah, maybe that wasn't the right thing to say, 24 hours later, she comes out with a video. And I think she was like in a graveyard, if I'm not mistaken. She was doing a video, and she basically said, I'm really sorry for saying all that stuff. And at the end, she made fun of the person who said it, saying that, well, we should all believe, in the tooth fairy and all this. And to me, it's just really sad to look at somebody like Senator Ernst, who I once thought was a serious lawmaker, to see that she now has to play to the dumbest, most vile, mega base of people and just be mean. It's just that comment is just like, in doubling down on it, it's just mean.
Dumb is the biggest loading block in MAGA.
It was just really sad to see. I looked at the video and I was like, oh man, come on, Joni. Like, seriously? I mean, if anything, you should have just left it. If you didn't want to apologize, just leave it. Just leave it and move on.
They think they're Donald Trump, that they can double down, never apologize, and move with it. And I think with Joni, met her or talked with her. Here's the thing. She has to go along to get along with the most ignorant portion of her constituency. So she went ahead and she doubled down on stupidity and ignorance and hate. That's what she is now. Because once you do that, there's no going back. I don't know how you pull yourself out of that ignorant flat spin, Amy. I just don't know. I can't
imagine that she really believes it. I can't imagine. I mean, she's a super smart, educated woman. It's just the playing, the lying is real, and then the turning around and having to be mean. And you can tell she's uncomfortable doing it. It's not
Of course she
normal
is.
for her. So she doesn't pull it off really well, but it's just really sad to see from my perspective anyway.
Well, it's almost like the whole thread of this show with all the incredible things we discussed. And I'd like to cheers to you, Amy, is about how we really are in a war against dumb. Cheers.
Cheers.
And if people want to hear more about the war against dumb, they better damn well subscribe to our podcasts and our YouTube channels, because we have a live coming up. They better follow us on our socials, Amy, right? Because the live is going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy.
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun.
I hope you join us June 10th.
I hope they do. And hey, cheers to another incredible Truth in the Barrel. And thank you, Amy.
Cheers to another great show, and welcome home, Denver. It's great to have you back in the U.S. of A.
Good to be back.